Hi, everyone. I'm Scott Feinberg, and on behalf of The Hollywood Reporter, I'm so happy to be partnering today with Turner Classic Movies and the American Film Institute, two places that are very responsible for my own passion for movies, to celebrate the life and legacy of Robert Osborne on what would have been his 89th birthday. Robert, who the New York Times called, quote, a one-of-a-kind cinematic savant, cramming delectable tidbits into brief intros and outros, dissecting films with guests, and conducting interviews with stars of a certain age, close quote, passed away in 2017. But he will live on forever on TCM and at AFI, particularly now that AFI is introducing the Osborne Collection, a micro-site within AFI.com that will permanently showcase hundreds of Robert's TCM film introductions, so that anyone who wants to hear how Robert introduced the classic movie during his 23 years with TCM can do so. For example, from May 6th through May 9th, TCM, as part of the virtual TCM Film Festival, will be showing 7 films for which Robert recorded introductions that can now be viewed on the AFI's website as part of the Osborne Collection. Bringing Up Baby, The Thin Man, The Best Years of Our Lives, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, Top Hat, North by Northwest, and the 1954 version of A Star is Born. Joining me today to discuss Robert's life and legacy is the man who has succeeded him at TCM and a great host in his own right, Ben Mankiewicz. Thank you, Ben, for taking the time to do this.
Of course, Scott. Happy to do it. I thought that for making a big appearance on for the AFI and with you, I thought I would give you guys the worst possible shot anyone has ever had on Zoom.
It's a cool poster, though.
Great. So the great thing is we're talking about Robert, and Robert had in his apartment in New York, 200 posters, I don't know, and 1,000 more in storage, and he'd switch them out sometimes. I get this dying single dinner at 8 poster and the most pathetic bookshelf in the history of mankind.
It's a pandemic. We're all excused.
It's the crime paperback. Anyway, house is in transition. But anyway, I'm happy and very eager to talk about Robert. And thanks for doing this, Scott. And thanks to the AFI for honoring Robert in this way that would have made him so happy.
Before we talk about anything, I want to suggest that we take a look at Robert introducing a clip, one of the clips that will be on the Osborne Collection, for a movie that I think is important to any movie lover, but particularly to the Mank family, given that a movie Mank has just been made celebrating the making of this movie. And that, of course, is Citizen Kane. Let's take a look at Robert's introduction for that.
Hi, I'm Robert Osborne. Thanks so much for joining us as we continue our 31 Days of Oscar look at films from the 40s. That caught the attention and sometimes the gold of Oscar. Next, we have the film many consider the best movie ever made. It's certainly the most controversial, argued about by defenders and detractors. It is Citizen Kane from RKO in 1941, a movie which not only introduced a 25-year-old Orson Welles to the screen, came very close to ending his career as well. It also nearly wiped out the 13-year-old RKO Studios, wiped it almost right off the map. And that's because the film incurred the wrath of publishing tycoon William Randolph Hearst, who bore a passing resemblance to the central character in the movie created by Orson for the film. Somebody painted as much more a sinner than a saint, this at a time when Hearst was very much alive and active. 78 years old, but vigorous and angry enough that he did what he could to keep Citizen Kane from ever being released. He wasn't successful, but when the film did come out, Hearst put out an edict that none of the numerous newspapers he owned were to mention the film or run a single ad for it. Nor was any Hearst paper allowed to mention the name of Orson Welles. And that edict held until September of 1943, when Orson married Rita Hayworth. That was such a hot news item that even Hearst had to lift the blackout. It's been said that secretly Hearst loved the movie, and the only thing that really angered him was how the movie trivialized his mistress, Marion Davies, portrayed in the movie as an untalented nobody, lifted by a powerful newspaper magnate to a status way beyond her capabilities. One fact, though, remains. Orson Welles, as a filmmaker, never topped Citizen Kane, and many firmly believe that nobody else has ever topped it either. Here's the film, the recipient of 9 Oscar nominations, including 3 personally for Orson Welles. Nominations for his acting, his directing, and for co-writing the screenplay In the latter category, he won, sharing that award with Herman Mankiewicz. From 1941, here's Citizen Kane.
So Ben, I imagine you were watching Robert before you ever met him. Can you recall how you guys when and how you guys first actually crossed paths?
It's funny, Scott, because for all the interviews I've done in tributes to Robert, I don't think anybody's ever asked me that question. And I can't quite recall the first time we met. We had a very interesting working dynamic that I suspect people in television production who aren't in television production might not quite get. But until recently, TCM never had more than one shoot going on at the same time until about 7 years ago. Mm-hmm. So for the first 10 years of my time there, or close to that, Robert and I were never in Atlanta at the same time, and we both shot there. So if Robert was shooting, I couldn't be there, and vice versa. So I really didn't ever meet him until long after I'd started. I was hired in the summer of 2003, and I think I debuted on Labor Day weekend in 2003. Goatee, and we had we shot me off front. We had a camera shooting from the side, so we did that thing that we thought was really like renegade, and literally all TCM fans thought was, you've hired someone who's not even smart enough to look into the camera. Robert Osborne has the decency to look into the camera, right? And I'm like, yeah, they got rid of that after one shot, but it did air for a couple of weeks. So I think I met him. We used to have retreats, company retreats in maybe in 2003 and 2004, probably 4 and 5. And so I probably met him for the first time, 6 or 7 months after I started in the summer or spring of 2004. And these dates, anyway, I was incredibly nervous. I was thrilled not to meet him. I mean, just delighted not to meet him, because I couldn't imagine what I would say. And I knew that the same way I felt when I met Max von Sydow, I was like, and Jerry Lewis, I was like, oh, these guys are going to see right through me. This is pointless. And he was, of course, he was very cordial and very nice, but it took a long time to get to see what I knew was Robert's personality and the sort of he had a wicked side, a wonderfully wicked side that, but I didn't see it, but I heard it from everybody. So part of our crazy working relationship is that we worked with the exact same people, right? Same producer, same director, same production staff, same makeup artist, same wardrobe stylist. Everything was the same, right? And yet we had no real connection, but all of those people, to a person without fail, adored him.
Yeah. Right.
And talked about how funny and and I was like, well, he's very polite to me. So our friendship grew. And as you'll, in one of the lead-ins that is part of this AFI collection is Robert talks about the 20th his 20th anniversary celebration, the network's 20th and his surprise 20th. And I wrote a little something for that and was part of that tribute. And we connected there. And I'm so grateful that we had a nice little friendship there the last 3 or 4 years of his life. But it was very strange working with this legend, working with the same people, doing the same job, not as well, but doing the same job, and not really knowing him terribly well, but knowing him through all these people who both of us cared about so much. It was an interesting way to get to know someone.
Well, it's also interesting, don't you think, that part of when you hear viewers and from viewers and the outpouring when he passed away, everybody felt like he was a member of the family, like they knew him because they spent so much time with him. And yet the reality was they knew virtually nothing about his own upbringing and life and career outside of that studio. And so I thought maybe what we could do is just go through his story a little bit, starting where he was born, 1932, in Colfax, Washington, which was apparently a small farming town, eastern part of the state, where there was nothing to do except go to the movies and then work at a movie theater. I was reading that at one point he fell off a ladder changing a marquee and broke both of his arms. I mean, movies were his life from the beginning, right?
Robert was one of those guys, we did our first podcast at TCM on Peter Bogdanovich, and as I was talking to Peter, I heard how many similarities they were to Robert. These are kids who they'd go see a movie, and then afterwards they would jot in their little black book what movie they saw, who was in it, what they thought about it,
Right.
year, release, theater, all of these things. And, you know, I don't think they thought they were doing something incredibly cool, which we now see it as cool. They were like, no, this is the thing that is most important to me, and I'm going to make this a part of my life. It's an early statement from guys like Robert and Peter. And interestingly, I think of Peter as the living link to classic Hollywood because
Right.
he was so fascinated with it and he imitates all these guys. So there's a lot of similarities between them. But Robert, movies mattered. And, you know, when we think of rural America, we instantly sort of focus on on the Midwest and the plains. But, you know, the Pacific Northwest, the rural parts of the Pacific Northwest and that part of the country in Eastern Washington, that's the Spokane side of Washington, not the Seattle part of Washington.
Right.
You know, that's a very different country. That is essentially, to think about it, you should think of Robert as like the equivalent of growing up in Idaho.
Yeah.
It's much closer to that way of life, the way we think of it, than say Seattle.
So he eventually goes off to the University of Washington School of Journalism. He said in one interview I came across that he spent his Saturday nights, quote, not drinking or partying or having a good time. I was at the library, close quote, researching film history. Basically, as you say, kind of he and Peter and some of their contemporaries, they were the internet movie database before the internet or databases existed. And then you mentioned Seattle. It sounds like he ended up there because after graduating in 54, he goes to the Air Force for a couple of years. I don't think most people knew about that. And when he was stationed there, that's when he got into acting, right?
Yeah, well, first, you know, another thing that I think people who started watching Robert when he signed TCM on the air in 1994 understood this, and this is certainly not to say that this is a requirement of being a television or movie actor, but Robert Osborne was a handsome devil, and so given his love of movies and his respect for the craft and his love of art. Right. And that interest in journalism. And I started as a journalist. So I understand that there's sort of a comfort level with being on camera. And and he gave acting a shot. And I don't know whether he ever would have been a star if he'd kept at it, but he would have kept working, you know, there's no question, especially as we got further, as more and more opportunities developed on television. There's no question that guy would have been on television as an actor for some time if he'd chosen to go that route. Thankfully, he did not. Thanks in part to Lucille Ball. He followed his dream. Yeah.
Well, and I hope we can share with viewers the photo in one of Robert's earlier books, which we're going to come to. But I mean, he looks like Don Draper. As you say, he was pretty sharp and I guess would be the same era. But apparently when he was in Seattle is when he started doing local theater just on the side. He connects with Jane Darwell, who won the Oscar for Grapes of Wrath. She says, you should keep this up and come to LA. You could stay in my guest house. And then, as you say, around that time, I guess, signs with Fox and then Lucille Ball, Desilu Productions. She became a huge person in his life, right?
Yeah, Robert had this way of people liked him. That's just it. People liked him. And a large part of that is, I think, what you saw in so many of the interviews, and that is one thing that I mean, I'd already learned it a little bit, but but it certainly helped to have Robert there, is that he listened, right? I mean, they'd tell these stories and he listened. And, you know, I've heard it from so many, I'm sure you have as well, Scott, given all the number of interviews you've done with some really top flight artists, that, you know, the key to being a good actor is listening. Right. Yeah. And, you know, if you sense that the actor you're doing a scene with is not listening to you and they're just sort of counting the beats until their line, it's not going to be a good scene. No. You're not going to be able to deliver your best. And the audience is at some point going to be able to see the inauthenticity. Yeah. Robert, I mean, look, how does a kid doing community theater in Seattle, Washington, convince an Oscar-winning actress like Jane Darwell to say, come to Los Angeles and live in my guest house?
Right. That doesn't happen all the time.
And Lucille Ball, at a time when everybody wants a piece of the giant money factory that is Lucy, does she say, no, this is not what he's interested in. He likes me, right? And so, yes, and she does the same thing. And she actually, I'm sure we're oversimplifying it, but I mean, if Jane Darwell got him into acting, Lucille Ball got him out. But because she thought, I mean, you ought to be doing this, you ought to be writing, and you ought to be chronicling this era. There is no one better equipped than you.
Part of what apparently endeared him to her was the fact that he knew character actors. I guess she felt that they were the most impressive people in the business, that you can come in and be totally different each time. And he knew all of them. And as you say, I think she also was impressed that he was a college graduate at a time when I guess not many actors were. But, people should know, if they go and look at his credits, I didn't realize some of this until prepping for this conversation, but he was in, uncredited briefly, but in Psycho, in Spartacus, in the pilot of the Beverly Hillbillies. I mean, I have to go back and rewatch all these things now and look for him. But, I think he and Lucille Ball reached the same conclusion, which is that this was not going to go very far in acting. But as you say, not many people were able to write about things the way they did.
Right. And he just had this understanding of what made the business work. Right. And and you can see it right there in that sort of what now we get what it is to be a really good character actor, right? How important that is for a production, the compliment that I'm sure I am not alone in this, but when I see someone, I see a character actor, of course, living in Los Angeles, pre-COVID, of course, that didn't happen infrequently. And I see a moment where it doesn't feel like I'd be a fool or particularly invasive to approach them. But I always say, hey, I'm a really big fan of your work, and I just want to know whatever you're in is better because you're in it. It's got, it might still be bad, but it's better, right? And you bring this humanity, and there's so many of them. And while we know that that's the sort of thing we know now, right? And there's a wonderful documentary about, I can't remember quite the title, but the guy who was in the thing, it's called something like that.
Yeah.
But Robert at that time, he'd come into a conversation and start talking about Elijah Cook Jr., right? It's not to say that Robert wasn't a good actor. He could have been. It's just, it was then and is now. It's just incredibly hard, and you have to get lucky. And we know full well in this town that there are a number of really good actors who gave up, not because they couldn't stick to it, but because they thought, I want to make a living, and I can't live with this, daily hovering anxiety that I don't know where my next paycheck's coming from. And that doesn't mean they weren't good. That just means they made a reasonable decision, maybe because they had people counting on them, or just maybe because they were like, this anxiety isn't for me.
Right.
So,
right.
And Robert had this singular gift that others couldn't deliver on, right? And this willingness to spend his teenage years not drinking, but librarying.
Yeah. Exactly. And I think the interesting thing, he came to be very associated with the Oscars. He was the official biographer starting in 89, or the official historian rather, with these every 5 years for a while, the history of the Academy. I think when Army Archer died, he became the official greeter on the red carpet. But it all really started because apparently Lucille Ball said to him, if you want to be hired as a journalist, the most impressive thing is to have written a book. And so you should write a book. The first book about the Oscars before he had any affiliation with the Academy was in 1965. It's called Academy Awards Illustrated, introduction by Betty Davis. And supposedly the only reason he decided to focus on that aspect of the business was that there was nowhere where you could even find a list of all the Oscar nominees. So do you remember him being particularly fascinated about the Oscars in your interactions?
No, not, I mean, he was interested in it, but, like a lot of us, and I feel this too. And, we got, I think that Citizen Kane intro was from 31 Days of Oscar in 2015, which we do in the 31 days or whatever month the Oscars are in, obviously in normal times, February. So we do it throughout February and then 3 days into March. sometimes I think that at TCM, we focus a little too much on the Oscars, right? And there's the tendency to say, nominated, but he only won one.
Right.
Like, and I don't say it anymore, ever. But I always think, what do you mean he only won one? He won one Oscar. He won an Oscar. It's amazing, right? Right? Oh my God. How many did you win? One? And I think, Robert and I talked about that that there's so much more to a movie than its Academy history. Obviously, during 31 Days of Oscar, we're going to focus on it. And it's certainly worth mentioning at other times. But, and it's this weird thing also that we have being, I don't know if it's that we're humans or that we're Americans, that we love focusing on winners. Yes. And so we have this tendency to look at the other nominees suddenly as losers. Again, it's crazy. I always think that, Marv Levy is coach of the Buffalo Bills. They went to 4 straight Super Bowls. It's amazing, right? It's amazing. I got it. They lost them all, but they're not losers, right? Finishing second 4 straight years in an incredibly competitive league. And that reflects that, from Lucy's advice, recognizing Robert was so smart, right? And so recognizing a market inefficiency, right? And nobody's right about the Oscars. The Oscars are important. They're not just important to this industry. They're important to America. People watch, right? It's this communal event, everyone coming together. So I'll write about that. And so I think he found again an inefficiency in the market,
right?
To talk like Billy Beane, and exploited it wisely and smartly, and then that led to a series of those books in an era when you couldn't look up.
Right.
Wait, I swear, didn't Richard Burton win an Oscar? You telling me he didn't? No way. He must have. Right. But you couldn't, that argument could go on forever with
it's
people.
Like, young people today, they, I don't know if, and it took me a while myself to fully appreciate what an unbelievably massive undertaking it must have been to do not only what Robert did, but Leonard Maltin back when you didn't have all these resources. And it's unimaginable to do what they did.
No, and Lucy's so smart too, because she's right then, she's right now, right? If you write a book, you're always someone who wrote a book,
right? It doesn't matter if it's good or bad.
Yeah, and whatever you ever introduced somewhere, at some point they'll go, and the author of 7 Things I Do on Saturdays, ladies and gentlemen, Ben Mankiewicz. Exactly. Like, oh, look at that, he wrote a book. And somebody will say, it's just a list of stuff he does on Saturdays. Like, hey, man, he wrote a book.
Yeah, did you?
Yeah. Did you? You didn't write a book. So, yeah. And now I got, I got 4 or 5 friends who in the last 3 or 4 years have published books. And, well, one of them not a friend anymore. 2 of them are idiots. Like, but when Robert wrote it, it was hard.
I bet.
Right? Yeah. Now, apparently, any moron can get a book published. No, so no, it's incredibly impressive. And again, I really, his that love of movies, that passion, he didn't, that wasn't manufactured for the job. He had, that's why he got the job. But this was a man who really understood how things worked and was willing to sacrifice, social life, sacrifice a lot of enjoyment, sacrifice a lot of personal time in order to pursue this goal of something that he cared deeply about. It's really hard not to admire Robert's work ethic.
Absolutely. And just in light of who our partners are on this show, I should note that the AFI catalog was another early unbelievable example of gathering information before the internet about the movies. And but to bring it to the organization that I'm here on behalf, the Hollywood Reporter, Robert apparently goes on the Dinah Shore show to promote his book about the Oscars, which basically leads to him getting a job at the Hollywood Reporter. And so that's 1977, starting doing film reviews. But by 82 and all the way through 2009, he wrote our Rambling Reporter column, which we still have, except that back then it was having to do that every day rather than once a week, which is, again, unimaginable. That, my colleague, Chris Gardner, who does it today, is an amazingly hardworking and just just tireless guy fishing for enough information to fill a column once a week. I don't know how you do that daily, and then also at the same time be a kind of upstanding guy. I mean, Robert apparently said that he knew that Rock Hudson was dying of AIDS, and out of respect for Rock Hudson, did not report that information, which today is, again, just sort of, I don't think something like somebody would sit on that today, most people.
No, I think it very unlikely that, well, certainly, the issue is only one person needs not to sit on it. And then that's the end of that. So Robert came from an era where, that doesn't surprise me in any way that Robert, of course, he actually didn't know that or didn't recall it, but you said it. And I thought, yeah, of course, no, he would never do that, unless Rock wanted it done. Right. And there's a sense of, did that really need to be news prior to his death? I could see why you could make an argument that it's certainly, I would agree that it's news after the fact, as we, try to, educate the country and fight a health crisis. But, respect for somebody's private life when it's not hurting anybody else is, Robert would never have. I don't even think my hunch wasn't even a moderately difficult decision for Robert.
Absolutely, yeah. No, I think you're probably right about that. And meanwhile, while he's doing this busy column for the Hollywood Reporter, he starts going back in front of cameras, but for the first time as a TV host. I see it was starting as the entertainment reporter for KTTV Channel 11 in LA from 82 through 87. Then he's hosting the movie channel from 86 through 93. And then apparently he was being courted to be the host for AMC back when they did uninterrupted movies, classic movies. And then one of the guys who was working on that venture decides, no, I'm going to go start another one in Atlanta to be called Turner Classic Movies. Can you kind of pick up the story from there?
Yeah. So what I know of that story, and it's a great story, and I'm sure we're making it slightly more dramatic and clear cut than it was, but who cares? This is Hollywood. Right. So, but all that's true, right, Robert? And I am, I was just interviewed not too long ago by The Ringer for a wonderful piece that they did on the 2011 Academy Awards, right? That was the Anne Hathaway, James Franco year, where I was actually hired by ABC to be on the red carpet, starting a run of that one time for me. Can't believe they didn't go back to me. I talked a lot about gambling. They wanted it, but each time they talked about it, they were like, "Can you make it seem a little less?" And I was like, "No, Colin, first you have to bet like $25,000 to win 100. It's over. It's going to win. It's going to win." And then it occurred to them, like, I don't know that we want to tell people this.
Oh, no.
Okay. So anyway, so in that, I was pointing out that look, I was a journalist and a broadcaster, and I'm proud to be a broadcaster. And I think that the job of hosting the Oscars is for either a broadcaster or a stand-up comedian who knows how to own a stage, right? And that's why it's not an accident that Bob Hope and Johnny Carson were good at it, right? They're broadcasters. And I'm sure there are, I thought many people have been good at it who were, shamed. I thought David Letterman was good at it. I thought Chris Rock was good at it. I thought Jon Stewart was good at it. So Billy Crystal, obviously wonderful. I think that job is for a broadcaster, and not everybody's a broadcaster. Just because you present well doesn't mean that you can effectively communicate with people. Robert, maybe because that's the kind of actor he was, but I mean, he was at ease, right? I mean, that sense that he was in your families, that was, that he was in people's living rooms and their family rooms. And that he was welcomed there, and that it felt familiar and safe and good and natural, as if this was the natural order thing. So it's amazing that he was good at it. It's not easy. TCM has brought in a number of spectacularly talented, Oscar-winning, Emmy-winning actors to present something on our air, and without me or Robert or one of the other hosts there, and some of them can't do it.
Yeah.
Like it's a different skill set. Their skill set is harder. Don't get me wrong. It's not, I don't compare hosting to being able to deliver a stirring, moving performance, but it is a different skill set. So Robert had that. So he has the jobs with TMC and with the movie channel, and then AMC, and he had an opportunity to go to AMC. They already had a host then, and I don't know at that time whether I probably, it may have been Nick Clooney, it may have been Bob Dorian.
I think it was Bob Dorian, yeah.
Bob Dorian. So they were, but Robert was going to play second fiddle to that guy, or at least, that guy was the main host. Dorian was already there. And so, but they were on the air in 1993 doing it, broadcasting classic movies, American movie classics. That's what AMC was. And then this offer comes up to go to TCM, to go to Turner Classic Movies, which is not on the air and is, I think at that point, at least a year away from being on the air. And he had to decide which job to take. And Debbie Reynolds, his wonderful friend, told him, she was like, "You're not a number two. You're the main guy. They have a better library. They have better movies to talk about. You can wait a year. And you should be the number one person and the person most associated with it." And I don't know how she knew how this was going to shake out, that AMC would get out of the classic movie business. And by the way, go into an incredibly successful business. I mean, they've made some unbelievable shows, but they do not show movies commercial free, and they don't show classic movies, and they seem to have the commercial come in every 8 minutes, no matter what's happening. The shark is opening its mouth, and Calgon, take me away. Just like that's on a clock. There's no, but Better Call Saul, for Breaking Bad, Mad Men. My God, they've created some amazing art. So he goes to TCM, and what a great decision, right?
And this is from the launch in 94, as you said. And there was, it seems like, an immediate rapport with the audience. And I wonder if you can talk about something that probably nobody else can, which is, I wonder the degree to which, is he showing up and just reading a teleprompter with a script by somebody else, or is he actually working on these scripts and putting his input in? Like, what is it like? How does Robert Osborne back in those days, and as long as you knew him, what's he bringing to the table that's actually him?
He barely saw any of these movies. He didn't know anything about it, right? He just came in there, read a prompter, right? I'm Robert Osborne. Welcome to TCM. Right. No, so I saw many of Robert's scripts. So the process is the same. It's the same for me. It's the same basically for the other hosts, which is that we have a writer who's sometimes a producer who will, and sometimes a writer, but freelancers all. And they'll write a script and they send them to us well before we shoot it, and then we rework it. Now, as the years have gone on, my reworking has grown and grown. The first couple of years, I was too terrified to change anything, but that has changed. I mean, I've been there 18 years now. Wow. So now that's the thing I by far and away spend the most time on, right? Sometimes an hour a script. I try. I mean, that's just sometimes you're doing 80 in a time in a week. You're spending basically a full-time job for 2 weeks working on these scripts. You hope to get it down and you get people, but basically Robert had the same. And so I do it on a computer now, right? Robert would get the script sent to him as I did originally, printed out. And then Robert, and you'd see in a red pen or a black pen, Robert, literally, the writing on the top. And then because you went down the side, right. And then back up there and circled around. And then he'd send those back and then that would get updated. And then we all do this now. Then before you read it on the teleprompter, you read it again so that it's fairly fresh in your head. And then Robert would make more changes, as I do now, although usually because I've already seen it, rewritten it. Sometimes these changes are just correcting typos, spelling, leaving out a word, or something occurs to you a slightly better way of saying this. Robert, I am told by a wonderful teleprompter operator who I haven't seen in a year, Sandy Winslow, that Robert would frequently take all the changes he made, and then he would change it back, right? And she would be like, that's what it was. And then sometimes on the air live while reading the copy, he would then again change it back just on the, so, but spectacularly involved. And one of my biggest challenges was because I had some of those same writers and they wrote for Robert and they tried to write in Robert's voice. And I don't, the biggest mistake that I or anybody could make would be to try and do things the way Robert did. I mean, he set this template, and without Robert's template, you're not interviewing me now. I don't have this job. So, I mean, Robert gave me this job. Robert enabled this job. Robert made this thing of TV movie host, right? He made it a thing, right? Something that mattered to the people to whom these movies matter. That's all Robert. And then I stepped into that. But then you got to craft your own thing. If you try and be like Robert, you'll fail. And it doesn't matter, because I'm not an actor, and the only thing I can be is the only thing I've ever been good at is being me. And one of the great things is this job sort of allows you to present your own personality. But and that's why I was so intimidated to meet him, because I knew he knew everything, and I knew he'd mention a movie, and I still forget titles. I there's so many times when I'll say, no, I don't know that movie, and then I'll realize, oh no, of course I know that movie. Well, I just forgot that's what it was called. But I will tell you this, and this was so comforting to hear. At one of the auctions for when Robert's posters, and he had this amazing poster collection. It's really at his home in New York. He had hundreds of posters on the wall, and then thousands of more in storage, and all originals. And after he died, they were at a couple of different times auctioned off, and I saw one of his close friends there. I won't tell you who, because I don't want to. I hope I'm not betraying a confidence. And I told that story about how intimidating it was to beat him, and I wish I'd known him a little bit better. And and it's just, I always think, when I don't know something, I think this Robert Osborne did not have to look this up. And he puts his hand on my shoulder and he goes, oh, Ben. He would call me sometimes and say, I'm doing, Top Hat. I can't remember which damn Astaire Rogers movie this is. Is this the one where and then he'd say, and because they're all the same. Right. And I was like, oh my God, Robert Osborne. He's
human.
He's human. That's exactly what I thought. Oh, he's a human. And there's a group of movies that he's not that into, that he has to seem like he's into. And that, of course, in some ways, of course, it made him even more mythical, because he stopped being robotic. Yeah.
Well, to your point about making these things personal, let's take a look at another intro that's part of the Osborne collection, which was his one for North by Northwest. And just people can pay attention to what's clearly personal touches that he's added to this.
Hi, I'm Robert Osborne. On this 21st anniversary of TCM going on the air, April 14th, 1994, we follow the screening of that surprise salute to my 20 years at TCM with a movie starring one of those good friends who was part of the surprise, and that's the amazing Eve Marie Saint. And I say amazing because she not only has done amazing work on screen, winning an Academy Award in the process, but she's one of the nicest people I've met in all the years I've worked around Hollywood. And she's done something very few important stars have been able to accomplish. Katharine Hepburn, always said there's one thing an actress could never do, and that's have a successful acting career and a successful home life. Not possible, said Kate. Well, that may be how it works out most often, but not in the case of Eve Marie Saint. Early on, she realized that as much as she wanted an acting career, she also wanted a home and a husband and kids, and that's what she has, receiving awards and great respect for her career and a great husband as well, director Jeffrey Hayden, who she married 63 years ago. They have 2 children, Daryl and Lorette, many grandchildren. Long may they wave. Jeffrey knows I love his wife, but I'm also very fond of Jeffrey as well. And right now we bring you his wife, Eve Marie Saint, in one of her best films, Alfred Hitchcock's North by Northwest, released by MGM in 1959, and teaming Eve Marie with Cary Grant, James Mason, and Martin Landau. Now, it's the most glamorous role Eve Marie Saint was ever given to play in a film. A big surprise, since here was this fragile girl that everybody loved, and on the waterfront, suddenly looming up like a reincarnation of Marlene Dietrich. Just one warning, this is one of those movies that's impossible to stop watching once you've started. Every frame of it is fun and certainly addictive. Hitchcock and everybody in the cast at their very finest. So here from 1959, North by Northwest.
So there you go.
Yeah, there's still so much to learn from Robert, because, like on paper saying, here's a word of warning, the movie you're about to watch is great. I'm like, well, that's not really a word of warning, right? like I don't know that we need to warn. He said a word of warning, and I'm like,
right.
What is it North by Northwest that we need to warn people about, right? But it didn't matter. It's this familiar way of telling a story that, is a reminder not to get fully caught up in the exact words. We're not writing great literature. We are telling people, families, a story about something that matters to them. And it is far more valuable to connect. And so that way, when he says, "There's a word of warning, this is pretty great. You're going to want to keep watching." Like, you're like, "Oh, it's great." It's so,
to me, it's like, it's like what Vin Scully is to sports, where
that's right.
Just, way with words that, it's not that he's necessarily the most eloquent or whatever, but people can't resist it.
No, yeah. He makes you want to share his enthusiasm.
Absolutely.
If I ever get there, then I'll have succeeded.
You're well on your way. So let's take an audience question, and then we'll have just a brief wrap up after that. Question comes from John Vance from West Hollywood. What film did Robert Osborne consider the best of all time? Do you know the answer to that, Ben?
I don't off the top of my. I'm sure there is an answer. He loved Random Harvest. I know he loved Random Harvest.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know he loved Random Harvest. I'm 86% sure that he loved Random Harvest. I love Random Harvest. Great last line. That, if you hear, Smitty, you can't not cry. No, he loved Random Harvest. He loved Greer Garson. And I don't know if it was his favorite. It's very hard to answer always that question, which Robert and I and Jacqueline and Eddie and Dave and Alicia get asked, I'm sure too, which is, what's your favorite movie? And
right.
I don't know. I mean, can you answer that question? Right. It's tough.
It's tough.
Yeah.
And I will say, I did see that he had mentioned that he loved particularly Tyrone Power and then Gene Tierney, just as
he loved Laura. Yeah. No question, he did. And Laura, and it's great, and that's it's an acceptable answer. But his enthusiasm for Random Harvest actually got me to pay a little more attention to it, and that started me on elevating Greer Garson far up my list. And also, I love anybody who's sort of, whose stardom came late and they sustained it. It's she's got a good story to tell, Greer Garson.
So there were a lot of the people who you guys talked about, you and Robert talked about on the air, who he actually came to be quite close with, not just Eva Marie Saint, but apparently for 40 years, he talked to Olivia de Havilland every Sunday. Angela Lansbury requested him to present her the honorary Oscar in 2013. What do you think it was that the actors and actresses themselves responded to in Robert that got them to trust him and open up to him in a way that they just very rarely do with journalists?
Yeah. First of all, I don't know what he saw in Eva Marie Saint. I mean, I don't know if this is the right place to say it, but I mean, she is obnoxious and self-centered. It's always Eva Marie. It's always her. No, the fact that he was able to share Eva Marie Saint with me was, I couldn't possibly love her more. It's true. Right. She is wonderful. And Jeffrey, who's now passed, Jeffrey was wonderful. Mm-hmm. Eva Marie Saint owes me a favor, though. I will point that out, and I'm going to get to that story quickly. I'll tell it quickly. Okay. But so the question was, what did he have? So, I mean, he had, it's that human connection. There's a humanity in Robert that causes Jane Darwell to say to a relative stranger, "Come out to Los Angeles, move there, live in my guest house, pursue your dream," right? And for Lucille Ball to take him in and not. Lucille Ball, I always think of Lucille Ball the same way I think of Muhammad Ali. Right? Yeah. These people they're not just famous. They cannot go anywhere unless they expect the thing to happen to them, right? And they matter to people. And so not surprising then for Angela Lansbury, for any of these people, and for Olivia de Havilland to talk to him every Sunday. He listened, right? He listened, and he didn't just listen obsequiously, right? He wasn't, there was nothing sycophantish about his behavior in any way. He connected on a human level. And you hear that from the staff at TCM, who were so moved throughout his illness and so worried about him. And, thanks to a couple of the intervention of a couple of staffers, Robert was around longer than he would have been. And it's just the TCM staff, these people, they loved him, and this was not a big shot celebrity who would expected things, I mean, he would, this is a guy who he gets a per diem, and we get these catered lunches in Atlanta. And they're like dinners that a Jewish family would have in the 1970s. It's like, it was just lunchtime. It's like 12:45 in the afternoon. And like, and there's a brisket, and I'm like, can't we get like a sandwich or something? Like, what's that? But Robert would like, and then he'd take some and he'd put it in a little thing. He'd take it back to, I want to have something good to eat at dinner. And like the wardrobe styles, Holly Haddisty, she'd be like, they buy your dinner, Robert. They'll get, you can spend $32 on dinner. You're Robert Osborne, man. Like, go ahead and go to a restaurant. It's okay. Have a glass of wine. He'd be like, oh, well, that's a good idea. He also, I'm told, used to think that no matter what, if there were vegetables involved in it, it was automatically great for you. So he liked Chinese food. So he'd eat Chinese food with like, or Japanese food, like, he'd like these sort of giant breaded pieces of, but no, it's a vegetable. What are you talking about? Like, Robert, it's breaded, deep fried. It's soaked in oil and fat. And he'd be like,
Weight Watchers. Yeah.
What? Yeah. So there was a regular guyness to him completely. And again, he had this, so I've heard two jokes from friends of Robert. I cannot tell them, that are so wildly funny and inappropriate. One story that Robert told about people in the business that you cannot believe these came from Robert. And you realize, oh, this was,
well, I'm happy to hear that.
Yes, right. He had this devilishly wicked side, he was very funny.
And it's very, pretty amazing when you guys get thrown some characters to be opposite for different conversations and things. I mean, I was looking at the list over the years, everyone for him from Hugh Hefner to Drew Barrymore to Donald Trump, actually last few years. And he could have a conversation with any of them and did. And, but as we wrap up, I just want to note, there are very few journalists who have ever had a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. As far as I know, it's just Hedda Hopper, Luella Parsons, James Bacon, Bob Thomas, Roger Ebert, Charles Chaplin, and Robert, who got his in 2006. He was also satirized on SNL 5 different times. He got a bobblehead of himself made, which I happen to have one right here, which is quite an honor.
Nice. Yeah.
I mean, this is a guy who came a long way from Colfax, Washington. And so I guess in closing, I wonder if you can just talk about what he meant to TCM and to you as his incredible run there came to an end. And he, it's now been 4 years since we lost him, but, was when he passed away, was there sort of a existential question or an identity question about what TCM is without Robert Osborne?
No, and there wasn't, because of Robert Osborne. And I remember writing and the line and then saying it often in those days afterwards for movie introductions, tributes to Robert, that Robert left TCM in a position to succeed without Robert Osborne. And he is the man most responsible for making that happen. A line I also give to journalists when talking about them, because I think it's completely true, is that, we mentioned AMC earlier in this conversation. Mm-hmm. I can't wait till Better Call Saul is back. It's one of the best TV shows I've ever seen. Obviously, Breaking Bad, Bad Men, great too. HBO, now you get HBO Max. You get access to maybe the 3 best television shows to ever exist in The Sopranos, The Wire, and Deadwood, and Succession. It's just one great show after another. Mm-hmm. And even if you're a news junkie and you're watching CNN or MSNBC or the other one, you don't. Obviously, I'm talking about CNBC. There is only one. No one says, "Oh my God, I love ABC." Whatever's on ABC, I watch no matter what. Oh my God, did you see what was on the History Channel? I watch only the History Channel. So, and you don't love Showtime. You like shows on Showtime, right? But TCM is part of the fabric of people's lives, right? It matters to them. These movies matter to them. The movies connect them to their folks, to their grandparents, to their friends, to their childhood, to the idea of their parents' lives, right? Mm-hmm. Visceral. Nostalgia is not it's not a poster. It's not the single poster I have on this incredibly lame wall. Nostalgia is a real feeling, which leads to real intense emotions. And we are a network that emotionally connects you to your history, your parents' history, your friends' history, your family's history. And we wouldn't have that connection if all we did was show the movies. It happened because Robert created this idea, figured out how to tell these stories before the movie and after the movie. He figured it out, enabling people like me and the other hosts, Dave and Alicia and Jacqueline and Eddie, to come in and do the same thing, right? Without Robert's template, this is nothing. It's not a thing. So no, we did not. I don't even think we suffered when Robert died. And I say that as a tribute to Robert, nor would he have wanted us to, right? We miss him, and I know fans miss him. And none of us are as good or ever will be as good, but he made this possible. And the fact that now he's been gone 4 years and TCM has passed 25 years. And this is, I think we're to 27 now. I'm very confident that in some form, however television looks, TCM is going to be 30, 35, TCM is going to be 50, TCM is going to be 60, and we're going to be 60 because of two people. We're going to be 60 because of Ted Turner and Robert Osborne.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for doing this, Ben, and happy 80, what would have been 89th to Robert. It's an amazing life story, and it will be, again, carried on through the AFI Osborne collection and at TCM Film Festival. So
and so you don't get the Eva Marie Saint story. Sorry, that's the way it goes. But I will say about the AFI, man, and that database, when you're writing scripts, telling stories about old movies, that the AFI is an indispensable resource, and I'm incredibly grateful to them for that.
Totally. And I will just quickly add to that their 100 greatest lists that, people always complain about, they disagree with lists or whatever, but those lists gave people a roadmap like Robert's books. And I'm one of them. I had nothing to do with old movies before that, gave me a blueprint, went through them, and very, very grateful to them and to you guys at TCM, because without it, how's a young person supposed to even know where to begin with old movies?
Totally. I mean, I only have 92 movies left to see on the AFI Top 100 list. I'm making my way through pretty slow. I hope to finish it. I hope
they might put out a new one before you're done. I hope so.
No, you're exactly right. That list made a huge, huge, huge difference. And the point was to argue. Obviously, they know there's going to be an argument. That's the whole idea.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Ben.
Thanks, Scott.